episode number 82. You can get all the show notes and resources at dadhackers.us/082. What's up, Dad Hackers? My name is Patrick Antonucci, and I am the host and founder of this podcast and community of Dad Hackers. Dad Hackers is a community of Christian fathers who are devoted to encouraging, equipping, and enabling one another to become the men that God has created and called us to be, so that we can raise up the next generation of fully devoted followers of Christ and leave a legacy of multi-generational faithfulness. Now, on this show, we primarily interview Christian men to dive deep into their experiences and insights into what it means to be a Christian man, a Christian husband, a Christian father, and a Christian leader. We ask questions that dig deep into the thinking and rationale and experiences of these men so that we can all learn and grow into the men that God is calling us to be. I'm so thankful that you've joined us today. Make sure you subscribe so that you never miss any of our value-packed episodes. Also, please make sure you leave an honest review if you're listening to this in iTunes or any other platform that takes reviews. Reviews boost the show's ratings, which means that more dads are going to come across our show and benefit from the content that we put out. I also wanted to let you know that we do have a free private Facebook group just for Christian dads. So after the show, make sure you hop on over to the show notes. There's a link for that in there as well. Chad, what's going on, man?
Hey, good to be here. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Looking forward to this. So happy to have you on today. Been looking forward to our chat. And so why don't we jump in and have you share a little bit about who you are, your backstory, and what you have going on. You have a little thing you're doing with some social media, some website, and why don't you tell us about that, Chad?
Yeah, I am just kind of beginning the journey really into a new kind of man. It's my handle on Instagram, and I have a website. It's called Be a New Man. This something's near and dear to my heart. I have really been either mentoring, discipling, or just counseling, or just encouraging men for about 18 years. So now this is just a great vehicle to get some of this information out. And what's really bringing about my work with the new kind of man is just my brokenness for men, and Christian men particularly. I see them as being tired and disconnected from God and other people. And I believe that sadly, I think the church has been giving incomplete messages to men. So hopefully I can straighten out some of that narrative for men, encourage men. And yeah, so that's what I've been doing as of about the last year or so, is when I launched A New Kind of Man. And I actually vocationally am a pastor in Dublin, Georgia. I pastor Dublin Bible Church, and great group of people and group of men that I'm surrounded with here. And we've been here for 9 years.
Awesome. And when you say we, who are you referring to?
My beautiful bride is who my wife and I have been married for almost 26 years, and we have two fantastic kids. My son is 23. I'm actually in his old room, so that's a pretty awesome thing. We kicked him out and be like, you're on your own now. Now I get your room, and it's my study. So I love that. And then we still have a daughter at home. She's 16, and she is fantastic. They both love Jesus, and we serve Jesus, not just because that's what I do for a living and get a paycheck, but because we love him, and Amen. We want to build up the body.
Awesome. You know, you just mentioned something there that I thought was interesting, the terminology you used. You said about your son's room, you turned into your study, and you didn't make it a man cave. I'm curious why you chose to call it your study and not like a man cave or something like that. You get what I'm saying?
Oh, I do. I a man cave is kind of Neanderthalish, and that's really not the type of man that I am. So I love the idea of a study. It sounds very eclectic to me, very turn of the 19th century. I like reading about and studying people like Roosevelt, whether it's FDR or Theodore Roosevelt or Winston Churchill. And I look at those type of men and I'm like, those were men who had studies, not man caves. So I thought they set a pretty good example. And that's really the kind of man that I am. So nothing wrong with man caves. Is that your thing? But it's not mine.
Yeah,
So
man. That's awesome. I like that. I'm trying to bring back the study,
yeah.
because when I not to bash man caves, when I think of man
Mhm.
caves, I think of men just straight up consuming content and being the recipients of entertainment.
Right.
Where in a study, the mindset is more, I'm preparing myself to be a better man and to be able to be a contributor to society instead of a consumer of
Well,
what's out there. And I think we need more men with that mindset of wanting to be contributors and wanting to add value to the world instead of always taking, and consuming and consuming.
well said. I totally agree. That's really my heartbeat is for men to be contributors in their home, in their communities, in their churches, in their marriage and in their relationship with their kids and their friends to be contributors. And it's okay to receive from that too. To receive from those relationships so that they're not all one-sided. I mean, truly, a relationship takes both sides. But I'm with that. My heart is right there. It's for men to be contributors first, and
Mm.
I think that's core to what a man is supposed to do specifically in a marriage, as he's supposed to sacrifice for his wife, as Christ did for the church. And that's a
Right
pretty
on.
high bar. That's all about, how can I contribute to my wife and to our relationship, and I try and model that for my kids as well.
Awesome, man. We talk about husbands loving their wives as Christ loved the church. And you mentioned something earlier when you were giving a little bit of your backstory about how the church has, for a long time, given incomplete messages to men. Could you maybe tease that out a little bit? I'm curious what kind of incomplete messages are we talking about, and how do we fill in those holes?
Yeah, either it's incomplete in really two different extremes, and I realize this is based off my experience, so this is not going to be the experience of every man who's listening for sure, and I'm thankful of that. I'm thankful that there's men who are killing it, and who are doing well in this regard. But I see one of two extremes. I see in churches a very passive man who is not leading his home well, who simply attends church just to have his wife get off his back, or just to make sure that his kids go to church. So he's not there to receive something or to contribute to the community. He's just there to pacify time and pacify people. So that's one extreme, and then I see the other extreme of men who are just tired and they go through the motions of church, but yet they're so bought into the things of the world. They're so bought into pleasure, and so they see faith as disconnected from every other part of life. And faith, if somebody is a follower of Christ, that's integral, and that should speak into every aspect of life.
Right on.
So that's what I mean when I say that. And sadly, in churches, and it seems like men just get a pass. They say, well, men just don't come, and as long as women are serving, and predominantly women are the ones in the serving roles more so than men. Not in every church, and I'm thankful that in our church, I believe that statistically we would beat the national average in that. And just because men do get it and they have a heart to serve the body, but also just serve Jesus for His glory. But there's some element there too, to where men are just that it's been acceptable that they be passive in churches and just kind of sit. And the environment is feminine. The messages can be feminine. It can be very touchy feely, where you don't actually see the full message of Jesus and the full life of Jesus. You don't see the fierceness of God and the justice of God. So there's a lot of talk and just simply resting on grace and mercy and love, which those are wonderful, but those are incomplete messages of God. God is so much more than just those three elements. And I believe it's been a little imbalanced.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen that a lot in my experiences in Christianity. The one thing that kind of intrigued me, I guess, is you mentioned how men are tired. what exactly do you mean when you say men are tired? I think that's going to resonate with a lot of guys that hear it,
Hmm.
but I want to dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that they could be tired for a bunch of reasons, but when I see them in churches, or just look at the overall condition of men in church, they're tired because they most likely, for them, they have just run themselves ragged doing things maybe that they don't even need to. So then when it comes to contributing church, they just they don't have enough zeal, they don't have enough passion, they don't have enough energy to get motivated to do those things because they've been using their time disproportionately in other areas. And maybe they're good areas, but just maybe not the best areas. And there too, maybe they're tired is because they haven't given their bodies, minds, spirit, everything adequate time to rest. So I'm a practitioner of Sabbath, not in a traditional or legalistic sort of way. I believe that there's so much latitude when it comes to the Sabbath, but and I think that's it too. Sabbath has been ignored, and because of that, men are just tired. So
Yeah.
they're working Monday through Friday, and then on Saturday they're just doing chores, doing whatever, doing everything they can. They kind of maybe didn't prioritize the rest of those things during the week. And then when it gets to Sunday morning, they go to church. And even if they want to go and to learn and to grow, it's just, that they haven't given their body a time to recoup. So then it's rinse and repeat Monday morning, and they start the same thing over again. And then if somebody like me asks men, "Hey, could you come serve? We have this person moving. Could you help put a roof on? Take limbs off of a house. Could you help? This widow. Could you help put a deck on this or porch on this house?" It's like then people like me in ministry, then we ask people, but and maybe we contribute to the problem, but there too, it's like just not having that relief valve that 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 I think is important in a Sabbath.
One thing that was interesting to me that was brought to my attention a while ago on this topic of Sabbath is way back in the creation account, before God instituted the Sabbath, he led by example with the Sabbath.
Hmm.
For 6 days, he created, and then on the seventh day, he rested, which to me is very significant because God is this all powerful, all knowing, ever present spiritual being who created the entire universe and everything in it. And I don't think he needs to rest. I don't think
Right,
he, like, physically in a spiritual way, he doesn't need
right.
to rest.
Hmm.
And I wonder if he rested for us as, like, you can work hard and bust it, um, but you do need to rest. You need downtime. And
Hmm.
I'm going to take some downtime just to show you that the one who's sustaining and creating all things still rests.
Right. Yeah, and even if you look at the life of Jesus, he did the same thing. He had just intentional times where he would pull away into the wilderness,
Hmm.
and just get away from the crowds, get away from the people. And I just know that they were very specific and targeted times in his life and ministry for him to pull away, recoup, so that he could be present, for the person who's next to him, because he was fully God and fully man. So there was that. You know, he struggled in the same way that we do.
Yeah.
So I think that he even modeled that. Absolutely. In creation, you see it, but he even modeled himself.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you also bring up a good point there that a man who's not rested can't bring his full self into a situation. And we talked earlier about men constantly consuming and being entertained rather than
Hmm.
contributing and producing.
Hmm.
And I think it detracts from when we're tired and we don't have that margin in our lives, that it actually takes away.
Hmm.
And I was reading in Michael Hyatt's book, Free to Focus,
Hmm.
a couple months back, how they've studied like bankers and guys that are putting in 80 hours a week, 90 hours a week. And when you get past 40 or 50 hours a week, that law of diminishing returns really, really kicks in. And people that work 60, 70, 80 hours a week aren't very much productive, and sometimes even less productive than people that work 40 or 50 hours a week.
Wow, I believe it.
And it's hard to wrap your brain around that, because the flesh in you wants to just say, if I just do a little bit more, I'll get a little bit more. If I just go a little bit harder, it'll work out and things will come together. But just like so many things with the gospel and with Christ's teachings, it really turns conventional wisdom on its head and worldly wisdom on its head. And if we don't get margin in our lives, we're really castrating, if you will, our abilities, and then we're detracting from how we can present ourselves to our families, our communities, our churches, and occupations, and whatever you want to put in that list. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that too. And it's, God has given us a certain amount of agency, just the ability to willpower, and it's subjective to a bunch of different things: family of origin, maybe some emotional trauma that we've endured, physical limitations, just physically, if our bodies aren't, they aren't all in sync. And there's different reasons for that, but he's given us a certain amount of agency, but he also wants us to use good judgment. And I think us as you produce a lot, you do great work and you produce a lot. And I try and produce outside of what I do for a living to produce on A New Kind of Man. And there's a great danger for us is to produce for other people instead of us then pulling away to have just a time of rest for ourselves, whether you call it a rest, whether you call it Sabbath. I know different theological persuasions like, the Sabbath's so Old Testament. Well, I disagree, but we can agree to disagree and say, well, just call it rest. And I think we all can agree on this. When we're not rested, we're not the best versions of ourselves. No. Like we're just not. I'm not. When I'm not rested, I'm not the best husband that I could be and that I should be. And my temper's short. My anger is, I'm not slow to speak. I'm very quick to speak, as a matter of fact. And anger is right there on the tip of my tongue. And really, it has very little to do with the people around me. It's what I've done to myself.
Yeah. So I'm curious, you mentioned how you've been discipling men and working with men and men's ministries for years and years now. When you have a guy that's willing to listen and willing to be coached and willing to be discipled, or whatever word you want to put on it, and he's tired, what are some steps that you maybe lead him through, some questions that you ask, or some advice that you give him to try to course correct a little bit so that he can be that, quote, best version of himself, and work toward that?
I would ask him, I'd say, what is your top priority right now? Like, we all have a bunch of priorities, but what's your top priority? And then I would just create a list. If the guy is married and he says, well, it's my marriage right now, we're really struggling. And I would say, then I would basically kind of create maybe a checklist and say, okay, if it's your marriage, what are you currently doing? What do you wish you were doing? And what would you eliminate right now if you could? And sometimes a guy just needs somebody else, or a lady needs somebody else to walk them through that, because they themselves, until it's actually talked about, they haven't really owned the problem. But as soon as it gets out there, then it brings about just a sense of urgency and like, okay, now I need to do something. So I would go through that and I would just ask him, hey, what's your priority? What is your number one thing? What are you trying to do right now? What are you currently doing? And what is it that you could eliminate? And I believe it was, I may get this wrong, but I believe it was Dallas Willard who talked to John Ortberg, who was a student of Dallas Willard. And are you familiar with Dallas Willard? Okay. Dallas Willard was a Christian philosopher. Right. Yeah. He was a Christian philosopher, and he was also a Southern Baptist preacher years ago. He died, I think, last year, I believe, or maybe earlier this year, but wrote all sorts of great books in the realm of spiritual formation. But I believe it was Ortberg who went to Dallas Willard, and he basically said, what's my number one, what's your number one tip you could give me for like pastoring a church or something? And he said, ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. Ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life.
Yeah.
And I may have gotten some of those details wrong. The quote, I may have gotten a couple words off of that, but I believe that is the quote. And I know it was those two individuals. You can find, anybody can fact check this on Google. It's everywhere. So it's an amazing thing. So that has just stuck to me. So that's what I would say. If somebody would say, man, I'm tired. And I would go through just a checklist. Okay, what are you doing? What do you like doing? What would you eliminate if you could? And then I would say, just ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. What would it take for that? Or maybe even create quadrants and say, okay, there's married life, family life, meaning kids, work life, church life. And then I would use that grid, and I would have them write in all the things they do. Okay, in married life, what do you do in married life? What do you do in family life? What do you do in work life? And what do you do in church life? And literally sit with them as long as it takes to write out just a box, write a square with 4 boxes, and just have them fill in the blanks, and then go through one by one and say, which one do you do, but there's no life in it right now. And if you sit long enough, they'll tell you. And then you can walk them through the process and say, eliminate that. Or train somebody to do this so you don't have to do this anymore. This is the thing that's actually robbing your joy.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. I'm curious about that quote, ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your lives.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that sounds pretty cool just on the surface. But when you dig into the lives of men, what are some common threads you see in the lives of men where they need to apply that quote? Does that make sense how I'm asking that question?
Yeah. Well, maybe it's somebody who says, and this may speak into the 4 pillars of my work. So if I do this, I just kind of think through these 4 pillars because I think these are like key to masculine growth. But there's other things too, but this is kind of the realm of thought that I have.
Yeah, that's good, because I wanted to get into those 4, so this will be a nice introduction to that.
Cool. So if somebody said, I just want to grow closer to my walk with God, and I would say, well, what are your current habits? And they say, well, I do this, but then what's usually followed up is, but I'm so busy. I mean, that's just what people say. That people in my circles, that's the very next line that they say, I'm just so busy. And I'm like, okay. So I may go through those quadrants, and I may go through those quadrants in any given day and say, okay, on a weekly basis, this is, what are you doing in married life, family life, work life, church life? Okay, what are you doing here? And then I may go down and break it down even further and say, daily, what are you doing in these areas? And then you really start to see you have more time than what you think you do. And usually, while I get home and I have chores and I have these things to do, and I want to care for my wife and love my kids, and all that's great. I'm going to say, well, okay, how many hours are you sleeping? Well, I'm sleeping 8 hours. Okay, well, if you're going to ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life so you can have a deeper walk with God, then you need to get up 30 minutes earlier. I just found you 30 minutes. You're just sleeping. Then it's a discipline issue. Then it's just disciplining your body to do what it is that you need to do. And discipline is really key to whether it's growth physically and physical strength, intellectual growth, relational integrity, in every aspect, in all of the pillars of my work. That's what it is. So in spiritual maturity, it's all a matter. It comes down to discipline. Then you talk about choices. And then, so that would be one thing. A guy would say, well, I just, I want to grow closer to God. And I would say, well, okay, well, what are the spiritual disciplines that you do? Because there's a lot of things too where, and I know we can get really deep in the weeds in this, and you may or not want to, so you can just shut this down whenever, Patrick. But I think
Oh, this is good.
I think people lump even spiritual maturity into. They say, that they're hurrying, and I'm like, well, what normal rhythms of life do you have, and how can you bring about the elements of spiritual formation into those rhythms? And usually, when people think, well, spiritual disciplines, it's like, okay, go to church, read your Bible, and pray. But there's more to it. Fellowship is a spiritual discipline. Just being around men, that's a spiritual discipline. Forming a band of brothers, that to me goes with fellowship. Community, meaning not just men, but community within the church. That is an element of spiritual disciplines. Confession, just open confession with God, is a spiritual discipline. Service is a spiritual discipline. That's supposed to be something that gives us life, not takes life, because we're doing what it is that we're called to do. And when we obey God, it actually is supposed to add fuel to us and motivate us to go do it better. So, I mean, those are a couple examples, and we could get like so deep in the weeds and all this stuff, but it does come down to discipline. It comes down to choices. And if somebody says, well, I'm just so busy, maybe it's, you look at the quadrants and you'd say, okay, well, I'm busy. And maybe you see there's a disproportionate amount in family life. And it's because they're allowing their kids to run their home. And I would say, well, brother, the reason why you're tired is because you have allowed your kids to be involved in way too many things.
Yeah.
And there's no way that you can even humanly do this. So it's no wonder you're tired. And I think we've all made mistakes in that regard. It isn't that I've got all these things figured out. I mean, I've made a bundle of mistakes, especially when my kids were younger and my son was highly active in sports. And so we were on the go. So I'm not saying this, as if I'm in some ivory tower, like, oh, I've got it all figured out. I mean, I've learned this through the school of hard knocks, So in different areas, somebody would say, well, I'm just so busy, and maybe they get to church late. When I'd say, well, why? Well, we get to church late. Again, it's ruthlessly eliminating hurry from your life. And you say, well, you get into church late. Well, and maybe it just bothers the dad, and would say, well, maybe what you could do is help set out your kids' clothes the night before, or set out the breakfast the night before, and make it easier on your wife. And all of a sudden, you may have just squeezed out that 15 minutes. And now you can get to church 10 minutes before, 15 minutes before, without just going in as the countdown hits 0, throwing your kids in the kids ministry and running to the sanctuary,
Yeah. And then
So
if
it's
you get
just,
there a couple minutes early, you have time to fellowship with people, because oftentimes when we get to church, we're there just in the nick of time or late.
right,
And then we quote corporate worship, but really we're just, staring at the back of people's heads, and singing
right,
songs together. And then we listen to a sermon and some guy preach, and we're still staring at the back of people's heads in front of us. And then we got, you know, sports games and dance lessons and
right,
competitions and stuff that we got to run to. And sometimes we got to leave church early just so we can make these things on time.
yeah,
And so you don't have any time for that spur of the moment community and fellowship. And I'll tell you, when I was a newer Christian, and I was single, so I had a lot more time on my hands.
mm-hmm.
I would get to church early, and I would stay after, and we'd chat with other people for 15, 20, 30, sometimes 45 minutes, just standing around. And oftentimes it wasn't real deep stuff, but it was that community and developing those relationships with people. You know what I mean?
Oh, I do. And that just feeds your soul too. When in doing that, and then all of a sudden you then find yourself as being a contributor at church. And then you hear people's stories, and then you can get to know other people that are there, rather than getting in at the last minute, struggling to get the kids where they need to be. Again, looking at the person's head and in front of you. And then you're just looking at him like, okay, I've got to go do this thing, or I've got lunch, or what do we have going on? And then you maybe don't even engage until halfway through the service. And then you've missed a lot. I mean, spiritually, you missed a lot. And
Yeah.
so I've noticed that all these things kind of have a cascading effect. The choices you make the night before is going to empower you to get up and work out in the morning, if that's when you're going to work out. Or the choices you make the night before are going to then empower you and give you the opportunity to get up and read the Bible in the morning. Or it's going to give you an opportunity to sit in silence. Or it's, you see what I'm saying? It's like, it just gives you the opportunity. And I love what Jocko Willing says about this, how discipline equals freedom. It is just so true. It's so true in about every aspect of life. I've yet to see an aspect of life where that isn't true. That discipline equals freedom. And it's freedom to do the things that we want to do, and freedom to do the things that we ought to do to benefit ourselves and also those that are around us.
Yeah, man. I've heard the quote, or somebody said it, that the key to a good morning routine, because people like to have a good morning routine, and that's when I shine, is in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to have a good morning routine. I've done it for years, and it's really been beneficial to me. But the key to a good morning routine is a good bedtime routine.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that just slides right in with what you were talking about, setting yourself up for success in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Read another book, I forget what it was called, but a guy called it Activation Energy.
Mm-hmm.
And just for example, if you're trying to run in the morning, he would say, set out your gym clothes, your workout clothes the night before, get your
Mm-hmm.
socks ready, get your shoes ready, set those out, get your headphones charged, get your phone charged, make sure that's all set out, primed and ready to go, because that's the activation energy. And if that's in place the night before, then when you get up, it makes it that much easier to take action on those things that you want to take action on. And you talk about spiritual formation and just the discipline of Bible reading. Set your Bible out the night before.
Mm-hmm.
If you're feeling I don't know, really bold, you could open it up to the chapter you're going to read in the morning.
Right.
Just little things like that can make such an impact on your day. And that brings me to this idea of discipline that you've brought up multiple times, and you talked
Mm-hmm.
about Jocko's discipline equals freedom. And this is personally an area that I'm working on, and I know a lot of guys have a struggle with having discipline in their lives. And so maybe, Chad, you could talk a little bit about what discipline is and how to develop discipline in your life, maybe some steps you've taken.
Yeah, I want to start with this phrase first, and I may have some guys that disagree with me, but I'll just say this first. Balance is a myth. So a lot of people say, well, I just need to be more balanced. I need to be more balanced. And the reality is your life is always going to change. There's always an imbalance, and that's okay. For example, my wife 2.5 years ago, she had a kidney transplant. So through that whole journey, if you were to look at my life, it wasn't very balanced. There was a lot of intentional care with her and to her, and I would not have even dreamt of having time to do what we're doing today. Every night was spent caring for her, and that's what I should have been doing. So balance is a myth. You gotta kick that out. To me, discipline is, it goes down to this: vision, intention, means. Okay, what is your vision? What is it that you want to accomplish? And we can have all sorts of visions, big visions for a family. We want to, take this trip in 10 years. Okay, vision, intention, means. You could have a vision of, I want to lose 15 pounds. You could have a vision of, I want to read the whole Bible this year. You get it. So there's vision, and then you set your intention. Okay, this is my vision. This is what I could do. My intention is, okay, this is what I intend to do. Then you evaluate, what's the means that it's going to take for me to do that. So vision, intention, means. And all of this to me works under the umbrella of discipline, because if you just say, well, just discipline, that is harsh. And we know that it's harsh. Discipline is harsh. And like when we're kids, I bet, most people listening didn't rally at the thought of their parents disciplining them, you know, or if you're a dad and you're the disciplinarian of your home, like, do your kids be like, just, oh, thank you for disciplining me? Like it's harsh. We know that it's harsh. The Bible says it's going to be harsh.
Yeah.
So
Doesn't seem
vision,
pleasant at the time.
that's exactly right. That's right. But it's the best thing for us. It trains us, to be righteous people, and trains us in holiness. And it does amazing things. So when it comes to discipline, what I love about this, it's so vague that it's helpful in every area. It's the vision. So what is it that you want to accomplish? The intention. Okay, how do I intend to do this? What are my intentions? Well, my vision is to lose 15 pounds. Well, so what I intend to do is I intend to lose 15 pounds by watching what I eat and by exercising, or maybe just say I'm going to sign up for a coach to 5K, or couch to 5K, and I believe that when I do this, I'm going to lose that weight. And what's the means? Okay, so what's it going to take for me to do that? And then you get into what you're talking about. You put your clothes out. If you're going to work out in the morning, put your clothes out. Put your headphones out. Make sure your phone's charged. Get your shoes out. Get everything ready. That way, you eliminate every excuse for not doing it.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. You're eliminating every excuse. So the running, that's one thing. Vision, intention means it's. For me, one of the things I have to do, just an internal motivator, it's silly, but it's an internal motivator for me to get up on time and to come into my study, not man cave, which we've established, for me to come in here and to spend some time in silence, and then also just to engage and read the word, is I set my coffee pot for 6:15. So literally when my alarm goes off at 6:15, the coffee is brewing, I can smell it. And I love coffee. So it's an internal motivator. Why not? Creating good habits. So and some of this, not the vision, intention means, because that's adopted from who knows from where else, from a conglomerate of probably things that I've read. But anyway, so I'll give somebody else the credit, whoever they are. But Charles Duhigg, in his book, The Power of Habit, he lines this out very, very well. And just, he talks about the motivators, and I can't really go too deep in that book. It's been years since I read it, but he does talk about giving yourself a reward. Another example. Okay. So I've got another one. I love to go hiking. I love to go hiking. Most people maybe wouldn't love to go hiking, but I even give myself, when I am at the end of a long hike, for me, I will reward myself with a candy bar or something. And there's nothing wrong with that. Most people could look at it, even if that's their pathway to even losing weight, and they would say, well, I think I'm going to try hiking. Give yourself a reward at the end of that. The discipline is going to be hard enough on its own. But I mean, we live at a great time where you can give yourself these little internal motivators, things that you like, or that I like, that are unique to us.
Awesome. Yeah. I think discipline is a very, very difficult thing to balance in life,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of play off here. There's no balance
Mm-hmm.
type of thing, which I tend to agree with you on the fact that balance is a myth. And when guys come into the Dad Hackers Facebook group, one of the struggles they often say is balance in life, like work-life balance, time management, all these areas. We're trying to find balance, and I think what it comes down to a lot of times is discipline and time management, and
Mm-hmm.
those two are very, very interrelated. If you're not disciplined, you're probably having issues in managing your time, or vice versa. If you're not managing your time well, you've probably got a discipline issue. And I'm not here saying that I have it all figured out, because I don't. I struggle with self-discipline as well. There's lots of times I know what I need to do, and I rationalize an excuse to not do it. You know what I mean? And it can get you into trouble sometimes, on a variety of levels. I'm not talking like legal trouble, but that could very well happen too. But
Yeah.
so now we touched on the four pillars
Hmm.
that you talk about. Could you maybe run us through these four pillars, maybe how you came up with them, or what they're even for?
Hmm. Yeah. The four pillars are based off of Luke 2:52, and that scripture says that Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and in favor with men. So out of that, I have drawn out the four principles that Jesus grew in wisdom, so intellectual ability, stature, physical strength, in favor with God, spiritual maturity, and in favor with men, relational integrity. So the pillars are, uh, to me, are integral to everything else that we do. They're integral. They in essence hold up and support the service aspect as to what a man is supposed to do, and the sacrifice aspect of a man, and the security, the physical security, relational security, spiritual security, all of those things. So to me, these pillars, they speak into every area. Even our finances. There's aspects of this with spiritual maturity too. Is being a good steward of your money,
Yeah,
being a good steward of your time. We've talked a lot about time, and we have to be good stewards of our time. You can make more money, but you can't make more time.
right.
So we have to be good stewards of that too. So yeah, the pillars, that's really what my work is centered on. And the intellectual ability, this one, if I think one is neglected, it's probably this one, just because intellectual, it's people seem to think, well, I'm not an intellectual, I wasn't good in school. I wasn't either. I wasn't good in school. I had to scratch and claw with through every degree that I got. And I was the middle of the packer in high school and even in college. So I understand that. And I don't consider myself and intellectual, uh, but I want to grow intellectually. So I do that by uh, whether it's reading biographies or studying people or listening to people who are just smarter than me, who talk about difficult ideas and who can put them into terms that I can understand, and then it helps me formulate ideas. Uh, I do this by reading above my current reading level. I didn't grow up reading. The only book that I really remember reading when I was a kid was Where the Red Fern Grows, and an amazing book, by the way. Incredibly sad, but a great book. And so that was the book. I think I read that in either fifth or sixth grade. Didn't read through high school. Didn't want to read. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I didn't get saved until I was 21. So reading was not even a part of my vocabulary until then. And then I started to read the Bible and those kinds of things. So it was a challenge for me to read, and there's a lot of discipline in for that too. For me to grow intellectually in the Bible, you're going to run into words that you simply can't either pronounce or you don't know what they mean. So you got to study it out and figure it out. If you have a smartphone, you can do just about all the study that your pastor can do with a smartphone and the internet.
Yep. Very true.
It's an amazing time we live in.
Kind of like you don't have an excuse.
Right, right. Yeah. So that's the intellectual ability side of it, and then the physical strength side of it. That's the side that guys tend to like. They like to talk about how much they can bench and squat, and they can run or whatever. And I love to do all those things. And on my Instagram page, I do post workouts of the day just to inspire men, not just say, "Wow, look what I can do." I mean, Patrick, I'm 45. There's a lot of things I can't do. So I'm just trying to do what I can do and to continue to grow and improve.
Hmm.
And it's really been challenging because I'm actually healing from a broken foot right now. So over the last month or so, it's been a real difficult thing to do. Is just to work out and get any sort of cardio in around that. But discipline equals freedom, you know,
Yeah.
and so just try and figure it out. So that's the physical strength side of it. And there's a lot of people uh, who talk about that. And what I would like to do eventually when I get my own podcast is even have people who are experts in these areas who are excelling more than me. Maybe they wouldn't consider themselves experts, but they're doing, better than the average man, so that we can become better by listening to them and hearing their stories. Some of the same stuff that you do, quite honestly. Just spotlight men who are kind of winning in areas. Relational integrity is another blind spot for men, just because when you hear relational integrity, then there's going to be discussion of emotions and all of that. And um, to me, my version of a strong man is one who can utilize whatever emotion that is needed in the moment. So if somebody is going to break into my house right now, um, there needs to be fierceness that comes out of me. I'm not waiting on my wife to do that or my daughter to do that. That's going to be me. So I need to use that aggression, righteous anger, and I'm going to, push back the wolves in that regard. So with relational integrity as well, there is an element of maybe developing skills, relational skills. So doing some emotional intelligence work, reading books on emotional intelligence. I'm an avid practitioner and somebody who utilizes the Enneagram, because not just because I want to know what somebody's personality is, but because it gives you the inclination of uh, just their inclinations, what they're going to do.
Hmm.
And if they're in a positive light, you see it. If they're in a negative light, you see it, and you can actually look at behaviors and see where they are. And even more specifically, it's been an incredible tool in our home with relational integrity to know, okay, this is my personality, my daughter's personality. We actually share the same. My wife's personality is different. My son's is different. His fiance is different than all of ours. So now my way of approaching them is in the way that they need to be approached, not the way that I would approach myself. And with relational integrity, it's understanding who you're talking to and being able to relate to them in the way that they want. And then there's a flip side of it. Is, to me, integrity is being able to be honest on the outside about what's going on the inside. And I try and inspire as many men as I can to understand that the sharing of your emotions is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength. Because if somebody will not express any emotions and they have that stoic demeanor, it's actually showing false self, not true self.
Yeah.
So that, that's how I look at integrity. And then spiritual formation, we've talked a lot about, and really drilling down on the spiritual disciplines. And there's a bunch of them. I don't even know if there's even a complete list, but yeah, I believe that was the 4 pillars.
Yeah, we got it. Intellectual ability, physical strength. We talked previously about spiritual maturity
Mm-hmm.
and relational integrity.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
good stuff, man.
Yeah.
Good stuff. I appreciate that. So like, what is your vision for where those 4 pillars are going to take you or going to take other men?
Yeah. Well, I've lived under this thought and this belief that for me, my goal is not to be famous; it's to be useful. So if I can be useful for a man or a million men, then the world's better for it. And what I want to do is to allow men to have the freedom that I didn't have for so many years, and to use these 4 pillars to help men heal wounds. And I hope to do that through writings, whether it's through being a guest on great podcasts like this one, whether through my own podcast, maybe some coaching down the line, maybe a community also, maybe with more of a cohort method. I'm not really sure on that, what that looks like. And so in pockets like that, of not just getting those pillars out, but creating dialogue and relationships and a band of brothers to see to it that we live out these principles with some accountability and with some encouragement. So that's where I see that work. And the podcast, I've put together some of the work for that, but I know the general vision of it, but there's still some loose ends there too. That's the reason why I haven't quite pulled the string and dropped my first episode. But it's kind of burning. It's in my bones. I want to get it out, but timing is everything. So, and I've been just kind of waiting and to see, if there's something that I'm missing that I don't want to jump too early.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I think you'll do fine once you pull the trigger on that. I think you'll do fine. So yeah, Chad, man, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We're going to start wrapping it up. You and I were talking before the show that actually coming up really soon, you are doing a men's conference at your church. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, and then roll into how guys can get in touch with what you're doing with A New Kind of Man and all that.
Yeah. So on November 9th at Dublin Bible Church, it's our very first Iron Men's Conference. It's what it's called. The men's ministry is called Iron Men. And so just really excited about this. This is something that has been birthed out of some gatherings we've been having for the last several summers. And we did 13, 14 week study actually at our house all summer long. And this whole vision birthed out of the small group study that we were doing at the time when we're walking slowly through Wild at Heart from John Eldredge. And I kind of made some messages of my own and took his ideas and added some things to it for our men. So it was really the spillover from that, which is really exciting when it's created internally. And so we're really excited about what God's going to do just to help us to, this iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. So really kind of figure out what that looks like. And I've intentionally held out a little bit where I haven't been the leader of it, that I've been trying to build up the men who would be the leaders. And I'm thankful that they are. And that way they're, that they don't just look to me as like, well, what did Chad say? Instead that it's more organic within the church rather than it's just, the pyramid effect of leadership at the top and then everybody does what I say. So I wanted it to be more organic. So I've been holding out literally for years for this. So it's a really exciting time. And you can, if somebody's interested in that, they can sign up at dublinbiblechurch.com/events. And then you'll see the Iron Men's Conference for November 9th. And if you just want to connect with me, the best way to do that is through Instagram at A New Kind of Man. And I am regularly posting on there. And if you have a bit of encouragement or you want to talk about something, DM me, just put in a comment. I'm active and I'd love just to engage in that way. Or you can also go to my website, of which I have things fairly regularly on that too. And the website is www.beanewman.com. So, and there's a pathway there for you to get connected into the New Man community. And eventually that will be the splash page for the podcast as well.
All right, man. Sounds good. I'll be sure to link all those things up in the show notes so guys can just tap or click right there and get connected with what you have going on.
Awesome.
Well, Chad, thank you so much for coming on the show. As we wrap up, I want one final question for you, and I like to ask everybody at the end of every show, and that is, in your opinion, Chad, what makes a great dad? Oh, it even rhymes. How about that? I don't think I've ever had that happen before.
What makes a good dad?
Chad.
Chad. Yeah. What makes a good dad is when a dad will get on a kid's level and speak to them in the way that they need to be spoken to.
Just gonna let that sit for a minute. It's good stuff, man.
Thank you.
All right, brother. Well, we'll wrap it up there. And thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And I think we covered a lot of ground. We got into a little bit of weeds, but lots of times in the weeds is where you find the gems. So that was good to get in there. And I appreciate your 4 pillars. And you've given us a lot to chew on from just our little conversation we had. So, man, thank you so much, Chad. It's been a blessing.
Yeah, it has for me as well. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Enjoy the conversation, and let's go help some men.
Right on, man. Stay sharp, brother.
You too.
All right, gentlemen, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope our conversation was a blessing to you and that you leave this episode better equipped to be the man and the father God has called and created you to be. If so, then I ask that you please leave us a 5-star rating and a quick written review in iTunes. Then make sure you head on over to the show notes to get all of the resources for this episode. While you're there, you can take part in our 5 Days to Be a Better Dad challenge, as well as get involved with our free Facebook community. All right, gentlemen, until next week, remember Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Stay sharp.